All right, welcome back, everyone. So, some interesting stuff to go into tonight. We're going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein's pilot is actually testifying now. The Gizzling Maxwell trial has now begun, and we have some of the early testimony now of information. The pilot has been naming names of folks who've flown on the Lolita Express. Be talking about that tonight. Also, Jack Dorsey of Twitter has stepped down. They now have a new CEO stepping up, and already it looks like there is some policy changes, which are very likely going to result in different types of, well, censorship. And part of this could result in the censorship of, well, memes in this case, because they're making it so that certain images of people can't be published unless you have permission from that person, such as political memes, for example. Also, some other updates on what he's talking about in terms of not recognizing constitutional rights of free speech and the new direction of the platform. Interesting timing as well as Trump gets ready to release his own social network. Also, folks, new updates as well when it comes to the Federal Reserve and the debt crisis, which is still happening, and the debt ceiling, which a lot of people stopped talking about. The Federal Reserve is now saying that they should no longer talk about inflation as being transitory. There's some details in terms of the technical language and why they're using it like that. But it looks like this is here for the long haul, is the way it's looking. Also, some updates on the Omicron outbreak. This is the new variant of COVID-19, the one spreading in South Africa, and countries are already locking down in many parts of the world, anticipating it spreading. Here we are again. There's a lot of mixed narratives, as you'd expect. That you have individuals, even with vaccination companies, some of whom are saying there's no threat, some are saying huge threat. World Health Organization is saying major threat. Other organizations, such as in South Africa, are saying it's very mild. And so there's a lot of noise on both sides. I'll be explaining this to y'all, so we'll get into it. That said, folks, as always, it's great seeing y'all here, and thanks for being here. Adam Ramses, he said the CCP virus She variant. Yeah, this is technically the She variant, but they passed over the She name. Yeah, John Porton, social media is evil. You know, I was actually talking to a friend recently about this. I remember back in like 2008, 2010, when the internet seemed so hopeful. They were talking about this new form of diplomacy and citizen journalism, and you had these new YouTubers coming up, and it seemed like the internet was going to be a place of free speech and free expression, and the individual being able to have a voice. And it seems now that all kind of went away. It's really been heavily stifled, actually. And I think that in that initial anticipation of where the internet was heading really turned around post Trump, when a lot of social networks decided to start censoring things because they didn't see Trump happening, frankly. And a lot of the censorship we've seen online has changed the nature of the internet over the past 4 or 5 years. But I do also believe this can change, because a lot of this is not being done through federal regulation. This is not like government technically controlling the internet. This is private companies controlling the internet, private companies which have a monopoly on the forum that creates the internet as we know it. But if someone's able to step up and create new technology platforms and new platforms all around, that can actually change very quickly, which will be, I think, really interesting to see how Trump deals with this, because Trump, as we've mentioned previously, and we haven't heard updates on it yet that I know of. Trump announced his Trump Technology and Media Company, which in the initial announcement does include a media company, does include a video streaming platform, video on demand such as Netflix, and also includes his own social network. None of which we've seen public yet, but they have made the announcement. So we'll see where it goes, right? That said, folks, let's jump into the first story for the night. I want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein in his Lolita Express, and the pilot of the Lolita Express, who is now testifying on the first day of the Gizzling Maxwell trial, Epstein's associate. Now it says here, this is Zero Hedge. It says Jeffrey Epstein's former Lolita Express pilot detailed several high-profile individuals he recalls among the passengers on Epstein's numerous flights around the world. I should note it appears these are not just the Lolita Express. Epstein had other planes as well. It says, while under oath during the Gizzling Maxwell trial on Tuesday, pilot Larry Visovsky Jr. was asked to describe his experience, to which he said, I certainly remember President Trump, but not many people associated with him. And there's details on this, I'll explain it. And he added that he also flew Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, violinist Isaac Perlem, former Senator John Glenn, and Prince Andrew. He said that while he was tasked with cleaning up, quote unquote, after one of the Clintons' flights, I don't know what that means, he says he never saw any sexual activity on the plane. Trump and Epstein were known to have been associated with each other in the early 90s as New York City playboys and successful entrepreneurs. But folks, there's some details on this because it's not, Trump flew on one of the other planes. It's a longer story. And he didn't go to like the Lolita Island or whatever it was called. There's a bit more of a story behind it, and the media, of course, took that and ran with it for a long time. Not saying writing him off, but it wasn't. It was different in nature. Basically, here it goes. Trump and Epstein were known associates again in the early 90s. Now, as the Daily Mail reports, it was previously reported that Trump had flown Epstein's plane from Palm Beach, where both had homes, to Newark in 1997. And so that was the Trump flight with Epstein, from Palm Beach to Newark, not from, wherever to his Lolita Island. Epstein is also said to have had flown one of Trump's private planes. Trump is said to have severed his relationship with Epstein and also banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago after the pedophile was reportedly trying to recruit a towel attendant in the early 2000s. In other words, Trump found out what Epstein was doing, trying to recruit one of his employees, and Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, and that was essentially the end of their friendship or whatever it was. Now, that was prior to his conviction for soliciting child prostitution, which Epstein was previously convicted for before he was arrested last time, right? Now, according to the Daily Mail, Visovsky, the pilot, spent most of Tuesday talking about girls Epstein brought aboard the airplane. They said this: Mr. Epstein brought her to the cockpit. She had piercings, power, blue eyes. He said of one of the alleged victims, to which Maxwell's attorney, that's Gizzling Maxwell's attorney, Kristen Everdale, asked, and beyond the striking blue eyes, you have said she had large breasts, right? Sorry, folks. To which Visovsky replied that she was a mature woman. Now, when asked this is further into the story, when asked how many other assistants Epstein had in addition to Maxwell, this is actually interesting, he replied there were many. And he identified Maxwell's own assistants. And so while we're watching the trial of Maxwell, Gizzling Maxwell, it appears based on this that actually there were others just like Gizzling Maxwell alongside Epstein. There were other assistants. Whether that means they'll also be prosecuted or whatever else, we'll have to see. But there were others, which is actually very interesting. And also Gizzling Maxwell also had assistants. He specifically named Sarah Kellen, who has been accused of playing a pivotal role in Epstein's empire, procuring girls, coaching them, and acting as a lieutenant to Maxwell. Visovsky also identified parts of Epstein's 10,000 New Mexico ranch where airplanes were parked, describing how he used to go into the main residence to pick up luggage and help install electronics. Something interesting, because if you remember the first time Epstein was prosecuted and found guilty and actually sentenced, the FBI documents actually noted there were recording devices in all the different in all the different rooms at his Epstein Island where these illicit sexual acts allegedly with underage, prosecuted and found guilty, underage girls were in fact taking place. It's not clear whether the electronics they're saying that he helped install right here were of that nature. It's just saying electronics. But he said it's a task he said he also performed in Epstein's private Caribbean island, which is Little St. James. Now, I'm going to go more into this in a bit. Just briefly, though, there's some important things with this Gizzling Maxwell trial. Everyone's been, I think, expecting this to lead to other prosecutions. and also maybe tell us some key information. It's actually interesting to see that the judge in this case has made it so that the really, explicit information is not going to be made publicly available. We're not going to see some of the most serious information with this trial. Also, they're not bringing out the key witness, the one who's making accusations against Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew and these other individuals. That key witness is not currently on the roster to come up. In other words, it looks right now like this is specifically a trial against Maxwell. And folks, it may also be the case that other people who are brought forward to testify, including Epstein's pilot, including, for example, these other associates who were just like Maxwell, it's possible they may be given, basically plea deals or so on, where through the act of even testifying, they may themselves get some form of immunity from future prosecution, which has me frankly questioning the nature of this trial as a whole, to be honest. We will see what comes out from it. I think it's important to have the Epstein case made public. The problem with this case right now, though, is a lot of the key information that people need is not going to be made public, it seems. Although we'll see what comes out of this. Again, this pilot explaining some of this, I think, is important to know. But I'll tell you in a bit some of the different rules the judge has put into place, because it's actually really important to kind of know where this thing's going. Now, folks, briefly, I should mention that we, again, are demonetized by YouTube. But luckily, though, we do have sponsors. Tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed certain things getting more expensive. We'll talk about that later tonight as well. With a government that's printing trillions of dollars, I believe 40% of dollars currently in circulation right now printed in the last 12 months, according to different reports. Inflation is on the incline, as would be expected. If the government continues its money printing and spending, the dollar could lose its coveted role as the world's reserve currency. So it's with much appreciation that I introduced today's show sponsor, American Hartford Gold, which is giving some ideas on how to diversify your money, your retirement, and your savings. American Hartford Gold can give you options to diversify with a portion of your portfolio in physical gold and silver. They can also help move your existing IRA into a 401k market or 401k market into a precious metals IRA. And they make it easy to do so if you're interested. They're one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. And if you call them right now, they'll give you 1 ounce of silver free for every ounce of gold you buy. You can call them at 877-260-2764, or you can text Joshua to 65532. Again, that's 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. And folks, big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring tonight's episode. And well, those of you who've bought the gold or silver when we first started running these ads are probably quite happy about it by now, because as we saw, there was the value of silver went up quite a bit since then. So it's worth looking into, folks. Those of you curious, tonight's tea of choice is just some nice ginseng tea with honey, one of my personal favorites. And I know some tea connoisseurs out there would argue that ginseng is not tea. Yes, technically tea is just the tea plant, but common language, we tend to call anything we soak in water tea, right? Drink. All right, folks, let's go a bit more into Gizzling Maxwell's trial, because I want to talk about, kind of the information that's not being shown to the public, because this is actually pretty important. And frankly, really has me questioning a bit of the real nature of this trial. Let's go into it. It says here, as Gizzling Maxwell trial starts, not all court records are public. Now, we should be asking why these certain court records are not being made public. It says here, in March, folks, a March order from the judge in the Gizzling Maxwell case has resurfaced amid criticism over a lack of transparency and publicity for the accused sex trafficker's trial. It says here, on November 28th, and basically in March, the judge made an order. That order is now making some headlines. It says on November 28th, multiple high-profile Twitter users reported that U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan ordered certain, quote, sensational and impure. What does impure mean in a sex trafficking trial? You would expect the very nature of a sex trafficking trial, especially when dealing with underage girls, as the accusations here are, sensational and impure information to be kept from the public. Now, you can use your imagination on what that might be, because frankly, we're not being told what that might be, and people are trying to figure it out. A bit further in, it says this: media personality Mike Cernovich, who was involved in litigation to make a trove of Epstein documents public, said he would file a lawsuit over the matter if the reports proved true. However, it was later revealed that Nathan, the judge, had made her order during pre-trial proceedings. Now, it says this: that is different than anything coming out at trial. Cernovich's attorney, Mark Rendoza, wrote on Twitter upon learning that the order came pre-trial. The order in question came from Nathan, the judge, on March 18th in response to motions from both parties. Something interesting here. Both sides, for some reason, both sides of the trial didn't want you and I to see certain information in this case. Information, again, the judge said is sensational and impure. Yeah, our pure eyes cannot withstand such information, I'm sure. So it's very kind of them, right? It says here, the Department of Justice, this is the Department of Justice, right, had filed a memorandum of law and several exhibits a month before, and the parties disputed what information should be made public based on that. Maxwell had objected to certain redactions the DOJ had proposed, while seeking to include additional redactions of her own. Now, the Department of Justice stated at the time that its proposed redactions were, quote, narrowly tailored to cover information implicating the privacy interests of third parties. Hear that, folks? Information implicating the privacy interests of third parties. And of course, that's what most people were anticipating this trial to reveal, is information implicating the privacy interests of third parties, namely the billionaires, world leaders, politicians, and wealthy influentials who were traveling to Epstein's island and having illicit relationships with underage girls. And folks who, frankly, a lot of us were waiting to possibly face litigation of their own and face trial for it. But the judge doesn't believe you and I should see that. Neither did the Department of Justice, and neither did Maxwell's lawyers in this case. And it's also, as well as information affecting other ongoing investigations, which actually might be something interesting if they are, in fact, doing additional investigations. Now, it says here, Maxwell's objections are not public, but Nathan, again, the judge's decision, states that the core of the objections was because the redacted information had already been made public by other means, which is interesting. Made public by other means. What would that be? Nathan agreed the Department of Justice allowing the information is in dispute to remain redacted. So we're not going to see that information that could implicate some individuals who may also be accused through this trial. Now, additionally, further into the story, it says this: additionally, Nathan allowed other redactions proposed by Maxwell. It is not clear, though, what was redacted at Maxwell's request. But the judge said the same information is also kept secret in her civil proceedings. Now, it is possible people can sue to get this information. Again, Mike Cernovich is suing to get some of this information. We'll have to see if that ever happens. Because, folks, a lot of us have been waiting for this for a very long time, and we're not going to get it, probably, just being frank. Although, who knows? It is interesting, again, that today, during the testimony of the pilot of the Lolita Express, and apparently other airlines as well, because we know that one Trump flew on was not the Lolita Express, and he noted that he did fly Trump. It is interesting that the pilot is naming names and talking about individuals who were on the flight, although he's not making any kind of illicit accusations other than some of the young girls who also flew on there. but not saying that anything illicit took place. But again, you're taking his word for it, although he is under oath, and we'll see. All right, folks, as always, just real quick, if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Or on the halfway point. Gary Carrill, you said, Joshua, I'm a father of 11-year-old boy named Hayden. He says, what's up? What's up, Hayden? Yeah, thanks for being here. And sorry for the unfortunate news we're going over as well. Now, folks, this being said, we're entering a new election season. The 2022 midterm elections are right around the corner. And something very interesting is going to be taking place, which is, remember in 2016, when you had the Trump election take place and there were all these funny internet memes all over the place and people were laughing about them. And a lot of people joked that Trump got elected through the memes. Well, those memes may not be allowed, on Twitter at least, in this coming election. Because Twitter has now made a new policy which makes it so that if you use the likeness of individuals, certain types of identifying information, personal information, including photos, but other things, they can delete your account. And it's interesting the nature of this as well, because this could be broader. The decision on whether to delete your account is going to be on Twitter itself. This is not a blanket rule, and we'll see how they enforce it. But the new CEO coming in, because Jack Dorsey is now stepping down, has made comments in the past that do suggest the possible political nature of the future of Twitter. Let's go over this. It says here, Twitter expands privacy policy one day after Jack Dorsey steps down. Jack Dorsey steps down, immediate changes to policy. The nature of Twitter has changed. Now, folks, it says this. A day after Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey stepped down as CEO, the social media firm announced sweeping policy changes targeting the sharing of photos or videos of individuals. And it said this in a statement. Beginning today, and this is today on Tuesday, we will not allow the sharing of private media. We will not allow the sharing of private media, such as images or videos of private individuals, without their consent. And it added as well that publishing people's private info is also prohibited under the policy and is threatening or incentivizing others to do so. Now, we'll see how broad that is. Like if you publish a funny picture of Joe Biden, just like many people criticized Trump when he was president, and whether that would be part of that, unless you have permission from Joe Biden. Whether if you criticize another politician, whether you need to get their permission first. Maybe you want to send a nice email to your local representative and ask if you can make a funny meme about them and get their permission, and Twitter might let you. But it seems right now that Twitter is not going to allow you to do that without their consent. Now, real quick, the platform has already banned users from posting or sharing others' personal information, including their identity, documents, financial information, or addresses, unless you have their consent. Now, if this was something taken across the board, of course, that's one thing. If this was a sweeping policy, right or left, conservative or liberal, wherever you stand, fine. That's one thing. It doesn't seem like that's the case. Let me explain. It says here, Twitter's Tuesday statement said the latest policy update is an extension of the previous rule, and under the new policy, material reported or flagged for violating the policy will be reviewed by Twitter and then can potentially be removed. And so who gets to make the decision in the end? Twitter, or namely Twitter employees who are acting at the behest of whatever their censorship protocols are. And we've seen, frankly, how their censorship protocols have been in the past, which does tend to have a very heavy political bias. Remember, for example, they were deleting information on Hunter Biden's laptop, for example, while having no issue of, for example, allowing information that criticized people on the other side of the aisle. The new policy won't, now it says further in the article, the new policy won't be applied in most circumstances to, quote, media featuring public figures or individuals when media and accompanying tweet text are shared in the public interest or add value to public discourse. And now it's unclear how broad this will be because, again, they did delete, I believe it was Zero Hedge's Twitter account. And I believe also New York Post got punished for it, for publishing things related to, again, Hunter Biden and his laptop. And so we'll see how broad this is. It says if you're featuring a public figure, and it's unclear what a public figure is. Was Kyle Rittenhouse a public figure? Was Sandman, the guy, remember he wore the MAGA hat and the Indian guy was drumming in his face? Was he a public figure? Remember, Sandman was only considered a public figure because the media made him a public figure by defaming him, and he won his defamation lawsuits. Does that make you a public figure if the media decides to attack you? Are you then a public figure? What defines a public figure? And also, how do they discern this? Is this any public figure? Which side of the aisle? This is one of the issues we're going to have with this Twitter update. It's also not clear what qualifies for public figure or individuals. Again, now a bit further in, it says this: furthermore, the image or video could be part of a newsworthy event due to public interest value. And this might outweigh the safety risks to the person, Twitter added. Meaning, folks, it's a gamble. Meaning Twitter can kind of decide what they allow or don't allow. This is actually funny enough how censorship in China works. Where the Chinese Communist Party has censorship rules, there are certain things you can't say, like Hollywood movies, for example. They have like general rules, but not really specific. And the result of this is that Hollywood films and other folks, they tend to over-censor. They over-censor anticipating that certain things might get censored. And what happens then is there's almost a competition to over-censor, trying to guess what the algorithms are or decisions these things are. Sorry, one sec. Sorry. In terms of where these things, in terms of, again, people tend to over-censor because of this. And because they over-censor, well, it creates this downward spiral where the censorship gets worse and worse because people self-censor. Now, about a year ago, Agrawal, the new guy in there, said his company should focus less on free speech. And folks, this is important because this does suggest the nature of where Twitter is heading. And the nature of this change, again, that happened on day one of, again, Dorsey stepping down. Day one, Dorsey steps down, and Agrawal says the company should focus less on free speech. And without elaborating further on this, again, previously he said this, he added that it should instead center itself around, quote, healthy public conversation. So what is healthy public conversation without free speech? What does this mean? The resurfaced comments drew concerns that Agrawal may take a more hardline stance against free expression on the platform. And this is something else he said, telling it to Technology Review. He said, our role is not to be bound by the First Amendment, but our role is to serve a healthy public conversation, and our moves are reflective of things that we believe lead to a healthier public conversation. And he said the kinds of things that we do about this is focus less on thinking about free speech, but thinking about how the times have changed. Folks, remember when you had the Arab Spring and you had these revolutions sweeping across the Arab world? Of course, that was stopped in Syria because of outside intervention. Remember, Libya fell and other countries fell. We watched Gaddafi get, killed by random mobs on the streets. And the United States at the time was talking about new statecraft. Actually, Hillary Clinton was leading those policies. And the idea of new statecraft, citizen journalisms, and the idea that people were organizing these protests online and they were calling for freedom all over the world, and how we were getting behind free speech on the internet because citizen journalism was the future. One of the main outlets they were doing that on was Twitter. Those days are over for Twitter, it appears, because free speech is no longer allowed and certain types of videos or images are no longer allowed. They will now be censored at the behest, of these different platforms, not based on any kind of federal policy not based on anything beyond it. It will be companies, private companies with very clear political agendas making these decisions. And so again, we'll see what happens. But again, folks, Truth Social is coming out, so we'll see where that goes as well. From another standpoint, this may be like the worst policy decision that Twitter could possibly make right before Trump releases his social network, because anybody who wants to have actual public discussion and not have their free speech inhibited for the sake of, again, thinking about how the times have changed, according to the new guy stepping in, thinking about how the times have changed, and apparently that's opposed to free speech. Well, if you want to be able to say what you want to say, you're not going to go to Twitter anymore, if that's the case, especially if there are other options. And folks, we'll see where this goes. Yeah, if you were asking, am I on Twitter? I'm like kind of on Twitter. I might like publish a couple links here and there. I'm not that active. Prior to January 6th last year, I was a lot more active. But they deleted 20,000 of my followers like overnight. And it made me quite disturbed about the future of Twitter, frankly, because I saw they could censor you to that extent and delete a whole lot of your followers in one fell swoop. And so it's not really a trustworthy platform as far as I'm concerned. Those of you asking as well, I am on Getter as well. I'm not that active on social media in general, to be honest. I did reopen a Facebook account, so if you all want to follow me on Facebook, go ahead. But I'm not that active there either, to be honest. Mostly I'm waiting to see what happens with Trump's social network, and so we'll see what happens with it again. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into some questions. If you have questions, leave them in the chat right now. We'll get to them. Also, I should mention a couple things. First of all, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, be sure to. We have our book of the month. And real quick too, Tim Barton, the author of our book of the month, co-author of our book of the month, David Barton, his father, is the other author. The book is The American Story. He has agreed to do a live Q&A with us, a special additional live Q&A with us. That'll be next Monday on the 6th, December 6th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be exclusively on Epic TV. That's epochtv.com/crossroads. So we'll do an additional episode next week just for that special Q&A. So be sure to jump on it. We have all the updates on that in the newsletter as well. So if you're not on the newsletter, be sure to get it. That's in the description below. And also we do, I have additional updates every week on the newsletter as well. So again, if you don't have that, be sure to get it. Folks, that being said, also, we have a lot of other great programs on Epic TV. And if you haven't checked it out, be sure to. One of the shows we have over there is Truth Over News. They show you a quick trailer of that right now because they have some really, really interesting stuff.
The polarization of Western societies did not start with Donald Trump. What we are witnessing now is the culmination of a process that has been going on for decades. Trump's rise undoubtedly accelerated the process, or perhaps the process accelerated Trump's rise. Suddenly, everyone is being called something: fascist, Nazi, communist, socialist, extremist. It feels as though that all-important middle, which used to make up the large majority of the electorate, no longer exists. But just as things are never purely black nor white, neither is everyone residing at the extremes.
There we go. Sorry about that, folks. All right, again, that's exclusively on Epic TV, epochtv.com/crossroads. And again, if you want to support Crossroads, please tell a friend or family member about Epic TV. That's hopefully the future of video news, folks. All right, that says, jump into some questions. Let's see. Hey, Shannon Haney, good to see you. You were asking about, sorry, the thing just moved. You were asking about the looting in South Africa and whether we'd see these kind of racial, crimes in America. Frankly, ironically, I think people would like that in a weird way. I think the people pushing the BLM protests and media defending them, ironically saying this is, was one of these different hosts was asking who said that protests need to be peaceful. You had when you had, again, in Seattle, you had individuals who formed the Chaz or CHOP site, again, an autonomous zone, which technically is insurrection, and people were getting murdered. You had one of the local government officials there saying, we're going to have the summer of love. You had businesses getting extorted. You had people handing out firearms. The people who claimed to be against firearms had no problem with that. Why was that? Why was that, right? You have individuals driving their cars into Christmas parades. The media wants to drop it immediately as soon as it doesn't fit their interest. Why is that? I'd say it's because it doesn't sometimes fit the narrative they want. They want to allow certain crimes to happen, and they want to criticize others. A lot of this is more about, I think, politics, and it is about actually caring about the issues they claim to care about. And so this is the unfortunate reality of these things. That being said, with the lootings in California and so on, those of you who have been following the news, basically you have large groups of individuals doing smash and grab robberies where maybe 40 individuals are going into big chain supermarkets, or not supermarkets, like Best Buys or whatever, and they're just robbing them, just stealing a whole bunch of stuff and destroying stuff, going in and going out. California, places like, for example, San Francisco, have legalized the theft of over even $900 worth of goods to an extent. They've decriminalized it. I've heard stories, individuals telling me in San Francisco that they've actually watched individuals go into Walmart, steal a whole bunch of stuff, walk out. The employees are not able to say anything. Walk out, walk right back in, go to the return section, returns, and then return the stuff they just stole and get cash in return. In other words, we're seeing legalized theft. Legalized theft. Employees can't say anything about it because the government is defending this type of theft. And ironically, one of the most basic roles of government is to protect your property rights. That's one of the most basic roles of government. People could technically refuse taxes over this stuff, which is the irony of it. Now, the real irony of it is, frankly, theft is much easier to do than this, ironically, these days, because I know, for example, there's credit card schemes where people can go on Amazon and you can just buy tens of thousands of dollars worth of goods. For example, you can challenge the payments through your credit card company, and basically you get the stuff for free. And that's just, there are people go on eBay and just resell it. There's all kinds of weird crimes like this that are essentially defended by, again, government policy or even banking policy or company policy. When it comes to, for example, the Amazon scam I just described, it's actually, the cost of that doesn't go to Amazon. The cost of that actually goes to the retailers themselves. And so if you're like a small business trying to sell goods on Amazon and someone does that scheme, you're the one who has to pay for it, not Amazon, which is also pretty freaky. Now, if you ask me where this is all heading, I'd say look at the trajectory of it. I think this is important, because what's going to happen if they legalize theft in CVS's or these, again, brick and mortar stores are no longer able to, have it be financially feasible to have brick and mortar stores, because physical theft is essentially decriminalized. Police can't do much about it. Employees of the stores can't do anything about it, essentially. What do you do at that point? Well, the likely outcome of this, and actually I've talked to people who work on construction of warehouses for companies who have been telling me for years this is where it was going to be heading, is very likely companies getting rid of brick and mortar stores. Very likely companies switching more to an internet-based market. And when you're looking at the trajectory socially with this, such as Meta with Facebook and the future of online markets, and even the lockdowns and the way things happen with shutdowns of businesses, folks, that's probably where things are heading. Consider whether that's the world you want to live in, and consider where you buy your goods, because if you're not supporting your brick and mortar stores, you may not have them in the future if things continue on the current trajectory. Questionnaire from Crazy Morp. He said, Josh, I heard from a high-profile doctor in my area that the Omicron variant came from 4 people from EU, European Union, in a high-vax city, but does not, which one? In a high-vax city, but does not, which one? Okay. He said, Do you know if that is confirmed? I have not heard this. As far as I know, the Omicron variant came from South Africa, based on the reports I've seen. There are reports that it has begun spreading in Europe already. There are cases confirmed. Allegedly, there are no cases yet reported in America. Who knows? In terms of South Africa, I did see cases suggesting, I believe, 4 people who had the vaccine already were infected, and there's mixed information on whether information on whether, again, it can bypass vaccines on larger scales, or if this is just an individual one by one type thing. One sec. And he said, do you know if that is confirmed? He said, backing up the data that all the jabs are making rapid variants. Well, that was one of the concerns, ironically, if you read a lot of your part, you're saying that backs up data that all the jabs, i.e. vaccines, are making rapid variants. Well, remember, that was one of the big concerns you had. And those of you who watched this show, ironically, when the outbreak was first happening, remember we actually had a vaccine that was on our previous show. That was before Crossroads. I had another show called The China Report. It was very brief. You can still find it online. And we had a vaccine doctor come on right at the start of all this. I mean, this is not a guy who was anti-vax. This is before any of the vaccines were made, before any of it was being developed. And he was noting that when you're dealing with coronaviruses, you need to be really careful with how you make the vaccines, because if you do it wrong, you may kill a lot of people. Basically, the way this vaccine doctor, a guy who makes vaccines for a living, explained it, and this was before any of this was controversial. He said that basically the normal way you make vaccines is, essentially you introduce part of the virus into a person's body, and the body creates antibodies for that part. Then you give them the other part, and the body develops antibodies for that part. Normal, right? Coronaviruses are different. If you do it wrong, or if the virus mutates or something like that, the virus can actually use the antibodies to become more deadly if you do it wrong, which is why you can't rush these things. That was said on my previous show, China Report, before this was controversial. Now, in terms of your question about all the data that jabs are making rapid variants, I have seen reports on that. If you want to see some articles on that, look up articles talking about what they call leaky vaccines, Leaky. The idea that if you have that leak, essentially it's not really a vaccination. Remember, they had to change the definition of a vaccination to call these vaccinations. That if it has that leak, such a leak that you may have to change the very definition of the word to pretend it's not a leak, then yes, it can create more deadly variants. That was one of the big concerns, and one of the big concerns that frankly got written off because people aren't able to discuss it, it seems. Again, folks, take it for what it's worth. I know the vaccines are pretty contentious on both sides of the aisle. Question from Seymour Butts. So, Josh, do you think that the flight logs, referring to the Epstein flight logs, might show Bill Clinton on the Lolita Express while he was having an affair with Monica Lewinsky? Good question. I'm not sure. I do believe that Bill Clinton flew on Lolita Express several times. It wasn't just one time. I can't remember the exact number, but he was on it. He was on it quite a few times. Actually, folks, it's interesting that while we're, again, there's a lot that is not being said in this current trial, but in Epstein's previous trial, a lot of information was actually made public. You can actually find the flight logs and the names of people who were on the Lolita Express publicly available already. Yeah, I believe it was over 20 times. Lou is saying 28 times. Puppy Love saying 26. Nigel Word, you're saying 27. Yeah, I know it was like at least 24 times he was on the Lolita Express. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but Bill Clinton was a frequent flyer. He might have had some benefits from those frequent flyer miles on the Lolita Express. Let's put it that way. Anyways, folks, you can actually find that information public, and I do recommend checking it out. A. Sullivan is asking, Joshua, can you talk about the injunction on CMS mandates for healthcare workers nationwide, specifically if we will still be required to submit exemptions or get the jab to remain employed? Right. So, folks, as you may be aware, Of course, there is a federal mandate for healthcare workers to get vaccinated. One of the courts in the U.S. has put an injunction on that is temporarily on hold. Now, as we've seen with these orders to put things on hold, they're not always followed by individual businesses. That's the problem you have. Now, in other words, they can put the federal mandate on hold. It doesn't mean that your individual hospital or your individual employer won't require it. And that's one of the big contentious issues we're watching with all this. And so we'll have to see. It's going to be case by case, very likely, depending on the hospital you work at, if you're a healthcare worker. But a court did put a hold on the federal mandate. And if your individual workplace decides to still force that on you, you can probably sue your individual workplace. And being a local trial, you may have a better shot at it, frankly. Another question here from Moonlit Acres. He said, Josh, why don't we delete our own Twitter, Facebook, etc. accounts? Why do we need them? They need us. Boycott. He said boycott would hurt them more than us, the people. I went through the same thought process. I did delete my Facebook account. I actually just started it up again like a couple days ago, although I don't really have anything on there. I did delete my Facebook account, and I almost deleted my Twitter account because I had like 70-something thousand followers, and after January 6th, Twitter just overnight deleted tons of accounts. And so my followers went from like 70-something thousand to like 50,000, like overnight, which did bring the question up of, well, how reliable is it? And is it a worthwhile investment of my time? And frankly, I stopped using it for a long time. Then I figured, Parler might be the place to go, because Parler was actually really happening right before all that. And then big tech shut down Parler, and they never faced consequences for doing so. And so that went down as well. And then a lot of people jumped to Getter. I am on Getter. Currently, to be honest, folks, I do have these different social media accounts. I'm not that active on them. But we'll see what happens with Trump's social media, if and when it does come out. The question of whether we should delete it, I went through this thought process as well with Twitter, and the conclusion I came to was, I'd say the unfortunate reality of today's world is that most discussion takes place online. We're on YouTube. YouTube has totally demonetized this channel. Our subscriptions, as you may notice, are totally frozen. They haven't changed in like months. At the height of this show, we were getting, I think, like 100,000 subscribers a month. I mean, the trajectory of it was even increasing. The rate of growth was increasing. Suddenly they cancel our ads, they cancel things, and the subscribers go from 100,000 a month to just totally frozen. So they froze this channel. Now, do I just delete it? Right? I don't think so. I think it still serves its use. I think it still serves its purpose. And I think that if people who are principled and believe in free speech and the ability to speak openly were to just eliminate themselves from the current public forum, which is unfortunately a lot of these platforms, you just lose your voice. And I don't think that's a good way to go. That being said, I will be trying out different platforms as they emerge. Of course, Epic TV is our own personal answer to that. Epic Times has its own channel, Epic TV. And so that's kind of our own response to it. Make our own platform. Don't rely on them, but maintain them until they kick us off or otherwise. If they do decide to just delete us altogether, there's my thing. I'm going to keep speaking openly. I'm going to keep saying things as they are. I'm going to keep being honest with y'all. If they delete this channel for it, so be it. We have other platforms to fall back on if that does happen. But until that happens, I'll be here as far as I'm concerned. The issue is you just don't censor yourself. That's what I'd say. Stay on it. Don't censor yourself. And then if they delete you for doing so, so be it. Right? All right, folks. I'm going to go into some more questions in just a bit. Some more stories in just a bit. I'll do one more question. This is from Lugaroo666. He said, Joshua, if Twitter is banning people and videos, then why is there a video of an Afghan police chief blindfolded and shot on the platform for months now? Well, it seems again that, and that's a good question. It seems again that it's selective censorship. Why was Trump's Twitter account deleted by Twitter when Trump was again on January 6th asking people to be peaceful and go home, while he's being accused of saying the opposite of, he's ironically being accused of instigating the crowd when he's actually telling people on Twitter to be peaceful and go home? Why does Twitter delete Trump's posts saying be peaceful and go home, right? First of all, and then you have false accusations making it seem like he said otherwise. And then in addition to that, why is the Taliban spokesperson on there, or was on there? Why do you have, again, execution videos? Now, Twitter could argue that it's somehow in public interest, that you need to have this news on there, but ironically, they claim to oppose terrorist-related content, but they allow terrorist propaganda from Taliban. Taliban is a terrorist network. So if you were to ask me, based on my personal observations, I'd say it's because, well, it's politics, that they agree with some politics and disagree with others. They disagree with, conservative politics, Trump, for example, but they tolerate very extreme leftist politics, including terrorist content, ironically, while claiming that they oppose such things, ironically. All right, folks, let's jump into some more stories. I want to talk about what's happening with the Federal Reserve and the debt ceiling, and the Democrats and the debt ceiling. And, well, folks, that the inflation appears to no longer be transitory, because the Federal Reserve, has been telling us for a long time that it's transitory. It may no longer be transitory. Let me explain. Yeah, and Lisa Bell, you're noting, including Antifa. Yeah, Antifa can literally call for violence on Twitter. Antifa can call for physical attacks and violence. BLM, the BLM leader in New York, was threatening violence. He was threatening blood on the streets, and that was allowed on social media. There were not DOJ assets activated, and letters, like these parents are having to face, letters suggesting they should be investigated as domestic terrorists. They were literally calling for fire and burning and looting and violence. BLM was calling for this, and there was nothing on it, right? You have a real serious double standard when it comes to this stuff. All right, folks, let's jump into what's happening with the Federal Reserve and the debt crisis and the debt ceiling and inflation, because it's not looking so hot, to be honest. But it's in line with where we've been saying on the show things are very likely heading, and we've been talking about for a while. Folks, basically what we've been saying is coming is now upon us, just to put it lightly. And so just keep this in mind. It is important to know. It says here, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell was questioned on the persistence of inflationary pressure, during a Senate hearing on November 30th, with the central bank chief acknowledging that it's time to retire the word transitory from the inflation narrative, noting the factors pushing inflation higher would stick around well into next year. Now, I won't go deeper into this one because there's a lot to go into tonight. But basically, folks, when they talk about inflation, in other words, well, the value of your money going down, essentially, they've been saying it's transitory. It's not going to last. That, again, it's not like hyperinflation where you have to, carry a wheelbarrow of dollars to your local supermarket to buy a loaf of bread, like we've seen in like post-war Germany or in Venezuela, for example. Of course, that's hyperinflation. We'll see if we ever get there. It doesn't seem to be showing signs of that bad just yet. But what this means basically is that, the number on the bills in your pocket stay the same. Your $100 bill still says $100 on it, but the actual tangible value of it becomes less. Part of that is because they may be overprinting money. Part of it is because the things that back it begin to go down. There are many different causes of this. But what it means essentially is that if you've been saving up your whole life and you have $100,000 in the bank and you think you're on top of the world, they can reduce the actual value of that. And so your $100,000 becomes equal to the actual tangible value of like $100. And so people get in very dire straits. This happened in many countries in the past. And one interesting sign of this, I was talking to Michael Yon, a war correspondent Michael Yon. I was talking to him about this because I was noting that I had seen different signs at some stores. You may have seen it too in the U.S. There are stores now saying we don't accept coins because of the coin shortage. There's a coin shortage. And I was asking him, I was like, what's going on with this coin shortage? Have you heard anything about this before? He said, yes, actually, typically this happens in countries. I believe he said in Poland, where they had hyperinflation prior to the hyperinflation, that the first thing to go are coins. So he said, cash in your coins, get rid of your coins ASAP. First thing to go are going to be coins. Because again, that's the lower end of the dollar. That's the lower end of the currency, right? Coins. And so this coin shortage he was suggesting is probably related to that. Because my question was, well, how do you create a coin? I could tell you my theory initially, that if you're creating a coin shortage and the Federal Reserve can print currency, our money in the US is not printed by the federal government. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. It's a private business, essentially, with some government overlap, right? The money in your pocket, they are Federal Reserve notes. They're printed by essentially a private company with some government interaction. They can print money. In fact, they've been printing it nonstop, which is actually, as they print it, lowering the value of your money in general. If, for example, they double the number of bills in circulation, they've essentially reduced the money in your pocket by half in terms of tangible value. They've stolen half your money essentially, while the number of bills in your pocket remain the same. It's a dirty system, basically, right? But typically, my theory was, well, if they can print coins, they can't print coins. They can issue coins, right? If they can issue coins, then why don't they just again, issue more coins if there's a coin shortage? My theory was, well, maybe they're trying to get rid of cash. Maybe they want to move to more of a digital currency, because if you make it so you can't use coins and they're asking for credit cards, it means also they can't give you change if you pay with cash. And so you have to use credit cards. You have to use digital currency. My initial observation was, well, is this them trying to transition us to a digital currency? That was my initial thought. Michael Yon suggested, no, it's actually a very typical and sign we've seen previously in other countries of inflation. So we are seeing this. Another story here, interesting, related to this. It says inflation lifting corporate profits, but eating away wage gains. In other words, folks, ironically, this is caused by policies from the people who criticize the millionaires and billionaires. The millionaires and billionaires are making it like crooks. Why do the billionaires mostly support socialism in the United States? Why do so many of them back socialist policies? It's because they make out like crooks. Because socialism doesn't typically hit the top. It hits it when sometimes the bottom. It hits the middle. And this kills their competition and drives things towards the businesses that are able to get the government handouts, the government, protections, and so on. Here you have it again. Inflation is lifting the corporate profits, but the price of that, the trickle down of this, is affecting folks like you and I, the normal individuals. And it says, with the U.S. annual inflation rate at a 30-year high, economists and market analysts are spotlighting the expanding financial divide between corporations and their employees. In today's inflationary environment, it says large companies are reporting greater profits and revenues. Large companies, not middle-sized companies. At the same time, Americans have witnessed all their wage gains from over the last 12 to 15 months eliminated. For many workers, real wages are down in multiple sectors of the United States economy. Now, folks, it's getting late, but let me just go over a couple headlines on this because it's important. It says here, another story, inflation worries send U.S. consumer confidence to 9-month low. In Pennsylvania, the energy cost, because again, we have an energy crisis on top of all this, is going to increase up to 50% starting Wednesday. People paying 50% more for energy in Pennsylvania. It says the U.S. stock futures oil sink after Moderna CEO says existing vaccines less effective against Omicron. There's disputing reports around that. We'll see, because people are saying, even the official sources are saying one thing and the other about Omicron, this virus variant. And Democrats as well are facing looming deadlines to avert the government shutdown and to also raise the debt limit. And we'll see what happens with it, because that is coming essentially on December 15th unless they do something. As this is happening, interestingly, remember, folks, there are a few different issues causing this issue, causing the crisis. One is, again, the lockdowns and the symptoms of the essential illnesses, the illness created by, again, government policy, which was the lockdowns, which is, again, businesses having been shut down for a long time, consumer needs staying roughly the same, people mostly going to online shopping, creating all kinds of different bottlenecks within the shipping industry, which is causing the shipping crisis, and then lockdowns at ports. The Chinese Communist Party decides to shut down its ports for, I believe, 7 weeks, which is making the shipping crisis much, much worse. Just as the US was beginning to start to clear up some of the issues that were blocking things, the Chinese Communist Party steps in and ensure it doesn't get cleaned up. In other words, there were many, many different symptoms, all of which are pointing, again, energy crisis, food crisis. In Afghanistan, they're talking about mass starvation very soon, caused as a symptom of all these things. Energy crisis in China, elsewhere, shortage of coal. U.S. is no longer a net exporter, no longer energy independent, or no longer a net exporter. Biden's taking our reserves, bringing those out. Most of those reserves, as oil reserves, are going to go to China and India based on known purchases of that type of fuel. In other words, folks, all the different issues we're seeing that could lead to kind of a pretty serious financial crisis or inflation, not only is it all happening at once, it's happening all at once on very large scale and kind of, in some regards, unprecedented for 30-year long, 30-year historical precedent, essentially, or some even longer than that, all happening at once and using international policies globally at the same time to create something, frankly, that is, frankly, we don't know what we're heading into. Let's put it that way. The future is very uncertain right now. Merlin, you're noting Great Reset. Well, again, the World Economic Forum was talking about the Great Reset of essentially essentially the idea is just the people might want to destroy the global economy and start from scratch and just remake it. Not saying that's what's happening, folks, but if it was happening, it would probably look just like this. And probably the same people pushing it right now would be pushing it. And so if it was happening, it would look like this. Not saying that's what they're doing. Anyways, crazy times we're in. I'll be keeping you all updated on it as we go forward because there's a lot to talk about, and also the potential of new lockdowns as the Omicron virus now spreads. And again, severely conflicting reports over how dangerous it is. While the World Health Organization says it's extremely dangerous, different individuals are saying, even claiming it's as dangerous as Ebola and so on. Sources in South Africa are saying it's not that serious. And these are the guys facing it directly. Are they saying that out of personal interest or because it is not serious? Who knows? Take it for what it's worth. Even some of the vaccine companies are sending mixed messages. You have the U.S. basically saying that the vaccines currently protect against it, whilst for some reason the vaccine manufacturers are saying that they're working on creating one that can protect against it. In other words, folks, the narratives don't line up. The narratives conflict with each other, even from official sources. And when it comes down to it, frankly, it seems like nobody really knows. I'll be keeping you updated, though, as we start to know, and I'll help sift through some of the nonsense for you. All right, folks. That said, I do these live Q&As every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So be sure to tune in again next time at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This coming Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, again, next week, next Monday, we're going to do a special additional live Q&A. That's going to be with Tim Barton, the co-author of the book of the month for Crossroads, which is The American Story. Again, folks, that's going to be exclusively on Epic TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, we have the updates for that in the newsletter, which you can also find in the description below. That said, folks, I know there's a lot of negativity in the world right now, and things are pretty uncertain, but there's still some good stuff happening. One of the great things is Shen Yun. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out. Shen Yun is a New York-based performing arts company. We now have a show on Epic TV, which is Shen Yun Creations. Folks, this is traditional Chinese dance and music, also Western orchestra. It's fantastic. They're not allowed to perform in China because the Chinese Communist Party really, really doesn't like them. And the CCP really, really doesn't like them because they're restoring the traditions and values the Chinese Communist Party has tried to destroy. Now, be sure to check it out. Some really beautiful music, beautiful dance, and something positive, folks. I'll show you a trailer at the end of this video, Shenyun Creations again. And folks, again, if you want to support Crossroads, please tell a friend or family member about Epic TV. And that said, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.